Okay, so I want to talk a bit about the subject of aviation safety. It's been a few days since that tragedy in Ethiopia, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, um, which crashed in Ethiopia near the town of Bishoftu. 157 people perished. It's by far the worst aviation disaster this year, 2019. Um, but I think it's important to remember the context of aviation has hugely improved, or rather, I should say, in the context of aviation, safety has hugely improved. If you look at, for example, the 1970s and 1980s, the rate of major airline crashes was far higher and there was far fewer air miles traveled. So, I mean, I don't know what the statistics precisely would be, but you'd probably find that there'd be millions and millions and millions of air miles traveled, accounting for every crash or something like that. So that's why when these things happen, they do get a lot of attention. It's understandable that this has made big news because quite a number of different nationalities were involved. It's the worst incident involving the Ethiopian Airlines ever, surpassing Flight 409 in January 2010. Um, and it's also the deadliest aircraft to occur in Ethiopia, it surpassed the crash of Ethiopian Air Force Antonov AN-26 in 1982, which killed 73. Um, so like every aviation accident, there's going to be things that are looked at. There's going to be things that stand out. Incidentally, we've just passed the 30th anniversary in the UK of the Kegworth air disaster. I've just watched a documentary on that, Seconds from Disaster, which occurred on the 8th of January 1989. And that was a flight from London Heathrow to Belfast. It crashed just off the M1 motorway. It's also known as the M1 plane crash, just off the M1 motorway, south of the East Midlands Airport at Nottingham, uh, just off the M1 in Leicestershire. And that was a major incident, 47 people killed, but actually, unusually more people survived, 79 people survived. As tragic as that was, it could have been even worse. The official ruling was pilot error, but I think Captain Hunt also deserves some credit for saving lives because had that crash on the village of Kegworth, bearing in mind this was only weeks after the Lockerbie disaster and 11 people died in the town of Lockerbie in that incident, it's very conceivable that many more would have died in the village of Kegworth and potentially on that motorway. So, as terrible as it was, 47 people died. Could have been worse. Um, I understand that all Boeing 737s have been grounded, or at least the MAX 8 model. I'm just looking at the Wikipedia right up here. And there's a lot of echoes with Lion Air Flight 610, which crashed in Indonesia last October. I remember hearing the news about that one. That was a major aviation disaster. 193 people perished in that incident. So, it's sad that it takes disasters to make for recommendations, to make for safety procedures to be put in place. And sometimes, even when procedures are put in place, there's other factors that aren't necessarily to do with technical faults or human error. Um, I don't think it's possible to ever have aviation 100% with a 100% guarantee that there would never be accidents. Sadly, I don't think that can ever be 100% guaranteed. It is good that aviation safety has greatly improved, but that's no comfort to people caught up in these tragedies. And I think the worst thing is when people are in airports, particularly if it's at sea. I mean, on land, if you hear an airline has went down and everyone on board has died, it's awful. But at least I mean, who am I to talk? I've never been in that situation, but I would imagine Not knowing would be far worse. We think of MH317, of course. Well, excuse me, MH370. I think the not knowing would be just dreadful. And it's heartbreaking to see relatives in airports just. And I think of the relatives, but I also think of those people whose difficult job it is to inform loved ones. So I understand this flight, Ethiopian Airlines, the one that just crashed, Ethiopian Airlines flight 302, was flying from Addis Ababa to Nairobi, and all 157 people on board have died. That is 149 passengers, 8 crew. Some of them were heading to a big UN conference in Nairobi. One of the British victims, she's been well documented, was an animal welfare campaigner. So it's very sad, and it's sad that it takes these things for changes to happen. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts. How do you feel about flying? Personally, I feel very safe. I worked out my last flight that I took, which was Amsterdam to Newcastle, was the 40th flight I've took in my life. 40. I feel very safe. I don't, I just don't feel that I feel the math is on my side, but I can't imagine what it's like to be in a plane that's going down and knowing that's it. I can't comprehend that. And this documentary interviewed a number of survivors of the Kegworth disaster, and they thought their time was up. It's it's quite a profound thought. I think something like that would really shape your thinking on life. Anyway, I'll leave it there.